My name is Callum Bryce. I'm 36 years old, and I live alone in a house that's too big for one person, in a town small enough that everyone knows what truck you drive. Hartley, Ontario. Population just under 4,000, depending on the season. The kind of place where the Tim Hortons on Main Street is also the closest thing to a town square. I'm a licensed electrician. I run a small crew of 3. We do residential and light commercial work across the county. Not glamorous. Not the kind of job that fills dinner party conversations. But the mortgage on my house is paid, my truck is reliable, and most mornings I wake up knowing exactly what the day will look like. That kind of certainty used to feel like enough. 7 years ago, I was engaged to a woman named Sophie Renaud. We'd been together since college, the kind of relationship that everyone around you assumes is the final one. She wanted to move to Ottawa. She had a job offer at a design firm, good money, the kind of opportunity you don't turn down. I had a business I'd spent 4 years building from a single van and a contractor's license. I couldn't just pack it up. She couldn't stay. We both said things we meant at the time, and then we said things we didn't mean but couldn't take back. The last time I saw her, she was standing in my driveway with a cardboard box under her arm, her hair tied back the way she always did when she was trying not to cry. "I'm not asking you to give up your life," she said. "I'm asking you to make room for one that includes me." I told her I was doing the best I could. She nodded like she'd already known that wasn't going to be enough. She drove away. I went back inside and finished the leftover pasta from the night before because I genuinely didn't know what else to do with myself. I didn't call her after that. She sent 2 emails in the first few months. I read both of them and typed 3 different responses and deleted all 3. I told myself I was giving her space. The truth was I was afraid that if I opened that door again, I'd walk through it and lose everything I'd built here. So I let the silence grow until it was too wide to cross. I hadn't thought about Sophie in a long time. Not seriously, anyway. Not until a Tuesday in February, when I got a call from a social worker in Ottawa named Janet Okafor. She introduced herself carefully. Said she was calling regarding Sophie Renaud. I sat down on the edge of my workbench without deciding to. "Sophie passed away 6 weeks ago," Janet said. "Cardiac complication. She'd had a condition she was managing, and it became acute very suddenly. I'm very sorry." I don't remember exactly what I said. Something automatic. Something that probably sounded like a normal response. "The reason I'm calling," Janet continued, "is that Sophie left documentation identifying you as the biological father of her daughter, Hazel. Hazel is 6 years old. Sophie raised her alone. There's no other family on record who can take her." The workbench edge bit into the back of my legs. "A daughter. 6 years old. She never told me," I said. Janet's voice stayed even. "According to Sophie's letter, she attempted to contact you multiple times during the first year. When she didn't hear back, she made other arrangements. Every email I deleted came back to me at once. Every response I drafted and thrown away. I'd been protecting myself from a conversation that contained an entire person I didn't know existed." "What happens to Hazel right now?" I asked. "She's with a temporary care family in Ottawa. As the biological father, you have the right to petition for custody. There's an emergency hearing in family court this Friday. That's 3 days from now. The court will want to see that you can provide a stable home environment. Steady income, appropriate housing, a clear care plan, and ideally some indication of a family structure beyond a single adult male in an unfamiliar province." "I'm in Ontario," I said. "Yes," Janet said. "That's part of the complication." I drove home that night without turning on the radio. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, looking at the chair across from me that nobody ever sat in. Then I walked through my house the way a stranger might. 3 bedrooms, 1 used. A second bathroom still had the original fixtures because I'd never had a reason to update them. A backyard with a fire pit and a rusted swing set I'd bought at a garage sale 2 summers ago, telling myself I'd fix it up eventually. I thought about every room, every empty shelf, every morning I'd made coffee for one. News was only one person I thought of calling. Petra Vance had lived 3 doors down from me for 4 years. She ran a registered home daycare out of her house, 5 kids Monday through Friday, ages 2 to 5. She'd converted her whole main floor, foam mats, low shelves, a reading corner with a beanbag and a pile of picture books. She drove a beige minivan and kept a first aid kit in her front hall and knew the name of every kid's pediatrician. 8. Before the daycare, she'd spent 6 years as a child and youth worker with the Children's Aid Society. She'd told me once, very briefly, why she left. I hadn't pushed her on it. Petra was also the most self-contained person I knew. Not cold, just careful. She had a way of keeping people at exactly the distance she chose, and she chose it deliberately. We'd had dinner together twice, once because her power went out in a storm and I happened to have a functioning gas stove, once because I brought over leftovers when I made too much chili and she invited me in. Both times I'd thought there was something there, some pull between us that neither of us had named. Both times I'd walked home and told myself I was imagining it. I knocked on her door at 7:30 in the evening. She opened it in jeans and a flannel shirt, reading glasses pushed up on her head, a mug in her hand. She looked at my face and said, "Come in." That was Petra. She didn't need you to explain that something was wrong. She could already see it. I sat at her kitchen table and told her everything. Sophie, the emails, the phone call from Janet, Hazel, Friday's hearing. All of it in order without pausing long enough to think about how it sounded. Petra listened. Without interrupting. She set her mug down and folded her hands on the table and listened the way she probably listened to children who needed to get something out before they could breathe again. I finished. She was quiet for a moment. "What is it you're actually asking me, Callum?" she said. I looked at her. The court wants to see family structure. A single man, no local support network, unfamiliar with the child. It's not a strong application. I know that. I stopped, started again. I know what I'm about to say is not a reasonable thing to ask. Say it anyway. I need someone who can come to that hearing with me and demonstrate that Hazel would be coming into a stable home. Not just a house. A home with more than one adult who knows what they're doing. Petra studied me. You're talking about a legal arrangement. I'm talking about whatever it takes to keep her from being placed indefinitely with strangers while the court decides. If you helped me get through Friday, if we went together as a unit, I'd cover every expense for as long as this takes. I'd sign whatever you need to protect yourself. Co-occupancy agreement, financial arrangement, anything. You've known me for 4 years and you're asking me to misrepresent our relationship to a family court judge, she said. Ooh, I know. That's a serious thing, Callum. I know that too. She was quiet. Then she said, "Tell me about the girl." I told her what Janet had said. 6 years old. Sophie had raised her alone. She liked drawing. She'd been with the care family for 6 weeks and had barely spoken. Janet had described her as guarded, watchful, the kind of child who had learned that things disappeared without warning. Petra's expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes shifted. "I left Cass," she said after a moment, "because of a case I handled badly. A boy named Marcus. He was 8. He'd been in and out of 4 placements in 2 years, and I knew that the 5th one wasn't right either, but I signed off on it because I was exhausted and I told myself the system would catch it eventually." She looked at her hands. It didn't catch it. He was in that placement for 14 months before anyone flagged what was happening. I found out from a colleague who called me on a Tuesday afternoon like it was just an update. She looked up at me. "I'm not telling you that so you'll feel sorry for me. I'm telling you so you understand why I can't hear a story like this and walk away from it." I held very still. "I'll come to the hearing," she said, "but I have terms." Tell me. First, Hazel's well-being is the only thing that matters in that house. Not the arrangement between us, not your guilt, not what it looks like to anyone from the outside. Her, always. Agreed. Second, we don't construct a story. We tell the court what's true. We are 2 adults who know each other and have agreed to share the responsibility of raising this child together. That is true. We don't add things that aren't. Agreed. Third, I'm not a prop. I have opinions about how a child should be raised, and I will say them, and you will hear them, and we will disagree sometimes, and that's part of it. Agreed. Fourth, if I ever believe you are harming Hazel, emotionally or otherwise, I will report it. Not because I don't trust you today, but because Hazel needs to know that every adult in her life will protect her even if it costs them something. I looked at her for a long moment. "If that ever happens," I said, "you won't need to report it. I'll leave before you have to." Petra held my gaze. Then she said, "Did you love Sophie?" The question landed differently than I expected. I thought about the driveway, the box under her arm, the pasta I'd eaten alone. "Yes," I said, "and I was a coward about it, and she deserved better." Petra nodded slowly. She picked up her mug, found it was cold, set it back down. "All right," she said. "I'll come." We drove to Ottawa on Thursday night. Janet met us Friday morning outside the family court building on Elgin Street, under a gray February sky that couldn't decide between snow and rain. She reviewed the documents, looked at Petra, looked at me. "They'll be watching everything," she said quietly. "Don't perform. Just answer what's asked." Petra said, "We're not here to perform." The hearing lasted almost 2 hours. The judge, a woman named Honorable Christine Lau, asked me about income, my home, my work schedule, my experience with children. She asked Petra about her background, her role, her relationship to me, why she had agreed to this. When the judge asked Petra directly, "Mrs. Vance, how would you describe your relationship to Mr. Bryce?" Petra sat up straight and said, "We are two adults who have known each other for 4 years, who trust each other's judgment, and who have made a commitment to raise this child together because we both believe she deserves a stable home with people who will show up consistently. That's what I can offer." Judge Lau looked at her for a long moment. "And if this arrangement becomes difficult, if circumstances change?" Petra said, "Every arrangement involving a child is difficult. I spent 6 years in child welfare. I'm not here because I think this will be easy. I'm here because leaving was the thing I couldn't live with." Judge Lau wrote something down. She looked at me. "Mr. Bryce, you weren't there for the first 6 years of this child's life." "No," I said, "I wasn't." "Why should this court believe you'll be there for the next 12? I thought about the pasta, the emails. Every moment I'd chosen the easier thing. "Because I understand now what that cost," I said. "Not just to me. I'm not asking you to trust my word. I'm asking for the chance to show Hazel." Duel. That afternoon, Janet brought us to the Care family's house in the Glebe neighborhood to meet Hazel for the first time. I had told myself I was ready. I was not ready. The Care mother opened the door, and a small girl appeared behind her leg. Dark hair, very straight, cut just below her chin. Brown eyes that looked around the edge of the doorframe at me with an expression that was very still, very watchful. She was wearing a purple sweater with a small penguin embroidered on the pocket. Janet knelt down. "Hazel, this is Callum. He's your dad." Hazel looked at me. She didn't move from behind the Care mother's leg. I crouched down to her level the way you're supposed to, the way every instinct told me to, and immediately felt clumsy and enormous and completely wrong for this moment. "Hi, Hazel," I said. My voice came out rough. She said in a very small, flat voice, "Mom said you didn't know about me." I held absolutely still. "That's right, I didn't know, and I'm sorry. Your mom tried to tell me, and I wasn't listening the way I should have been." Hazel processed this. "Did you want to know?" she asked. It was not a question I had prepared for. "Yes," I said. "I really wish I had." She looked at me a moment longer. Then her eyes moved past me to Petra. "Who are you?" she said. Petra stepped forward and sat down cross-legged on the hallway floor, so she was below Hazel's eye level, not above it. She didn't reach out or try to close the distance. She just settled, like she had all the time in the world and no particular agenda. "My name is Petra," she said. "I take care of kids for a living." I thought maybe Hazel could use someone like that around. Hazel considered this with the gravity of someone much older than 6. "What kind of kids?" "Little ones. Younger than you, mostly. I have a reading corner at my house. Beanbag chair, good light, your pick of books." A pause. "Do you have Puffin books?" "I have an entire shelf of Puffin books." Hazel looked at the floor, then back at Petra, then briefly at me. "Okay," she said. "Just that." We drove back to Hartley the next morning, with Hazel in the back seat. Her seatbelt done up very precisely, a small rolling suitcase in the trunk and a backpack on her lap that she held with both hands the entire way. She didn't ask many questions. She watched the highway out the window with her forehead nearly touching the glass. Once, somewhere past Kingston, she said, "Is your house big?" "Big enough," I said. "Do you have animals?" "No, but there's a backyard." Silence. "Then Mom had a cat named Biscuit. He went to live with her friend." I didn't know what to say, so I said, "Do you want a cat?" Hazel thought about this seriously. "Maybe later," she said. I caught Petra's eye in the passenger seat. She gave me a very small nod that meant that was the right answer. The first weeks were hard in ways I hadn't anticipated. Hazel didn't cry much. She didn't have tantrums. Her grief was quieter than that. She would go very still sometimes, in the middle of eating or drawing or watching something on TV, like she'd stepped half out of the room without moving. She slept with the light on. She ate slowly. She kept her backpack within reach at all times. Petra moved into the second bedroom. The daycare kids came Monday through Friday, and Hazel would sit at the far end of the living room and watch them with a complicated expression. Part interest, part wariness, like she was deciding whether this was safe. After the third day, one of the younger ones, a 2-year-old named Bia, toddled over and handed Hazel a plastic block for no apparent reason, then toddled back. Hazel held the block for the rest of the morning. I wasn't home for that part. Petra told me about it that evening, after Hazel was asleep, while we sat at the kitchen table drinking tea. She's watching everything, Petra said. Taking inventory. She needs to see that the patterns hold. What patterns? Meals at the same time. Adults who say what they're going to do and then do it. No surprises she hasn't been warned about. She wrapped her hands around her mug. When you say you'll be home at 6, be home at 6. I was home at 6 every night for the next 3 weeks. Some nights it meant leaving a job site before I was done and going back early the next morning. Petra noticed. She didn't say anything about it directly. She just started having dinner on the table when I got in. The moment things started to shift, really shift, was small. I'd promised Hazel I would read to her before bed. I'd been doing it every night, working through a stack of books Petra had brought from the daycare. One night I came in late from an emergency call, after 9, muddy boots and a headache, and Hazel was already asleep. I stood in her doorway for a long time, looking at her. Her backpack was hanging on the hook we'd put up for it. A drawing she'd done of a bird was taped to the wall above her desk. In the morning I apologized for missing bedtime. Hazel looked at her cereal. "It's okay," she said. "It's not actually," I said. I said I would and I didn't. That matters. She looked up at me. "Mom used to say, 'It's okay,' when she was actually disappointed," she said. I held very still. "Yeah, I do that sometimes too. I'm trying not to." Hazel stirred her cereal. "Petra doesn't say it's okay if it's not okay," she said. "No," I agreed, "she really doesn't." Something that might have been the beginning of a smile crossed Hazel's face. So quickly I nearly missed it. I began to understand what Petra had meant about the patterns. Every small promise kept was a stone placed in a wall that Hazel was quietly building around herself. Not to keep us out, I eventually realized, but to determine whether it was safe to let us in. I wasn't good at this. I made mistakes. The first one that cost me something real happened about a month in, when Hazel found a box of Sophie's things I'd been holding on to, sent by Janet after we'd settled in. I had meant to go through it with Hazel, to let her choose what she wanted to keep. Instead, I'd put it on the top shelf of the hall closet while I figured out what to say, and she found it on her own on a Saturday morning, dragging it down with a broom handle because she'd seen it there, and I hadn't explained what it was. She opened it sitting on the hallway floor. Sophie's handwriting on an envelope inside. A few photographs. A small ceramic owl Sophie had apparently kept on her desk. Hazel sat there for a long time with the owl in her hands. She didn't cry, and she went very quiet in that particular way that was worse than crying. When I came out of the bathroom and found her there, I sat down on the floor beside her. I didn't say anything at first. After a while, she said, "Why was this in the closet?" "Because I was trying to figure out the right moment," I said. "And I waited too long. That was my mistake, not yours." She turned the owl over in her hands. "Mom called this guy Gerald," she said. "That's a good name for an owl," I said. She didn't say anything else. But she carried Gerald to her room and put him on the shelf next to the wooden things I'd made her, a small bird, a lopsided star, and that evening at dinner she ate her whole plate without going still once. I started making things with my hands in the evenings after Hazel was in bed. I'd always done small woodworking. It was the thing I did instead of talking when I had too much in my head. I made Hazel a small shelf for her room, low enough that she could reach all of it. She watched me install it with the focused attention of someone cataloging information. "Can I learn?" she asked. "How to build things. How to use the tools." I looked at her, 6 years old. "We can start with the safe ones," I said. Measuring tape, sandpaper. Later, a small saw with supervision. She gave a single nod, like we'd concluded a business arrangement. The daycare children adored her in the uncomplicated way that young children adore anyone who pays them attention. By the second month, Hazel had established herself as a de facto assistant, handing out crackers at snack time, reading to the littler ones with a patience and gravity that made Petra look at me with an expression I didn't have a word for yet. One afternoon, a 3-year-old named Sam scraped his knee on the back step, and Hazel was there before either of us, saying calmly, "It's okay, it's a small one, we have to find Petra." and steering him through the back door with her hand on his shoulder. Petra cleaned the scrape and put on a bandage, and afterward, when Sam had gone back to playing, she looked at me across the kitchen and said quietly, "She's going to be all right." "Is she?" I said. "Yes," Petra said, not reassurance, just fact. I believed her. Social worker assigned to the case, a man named Kevin Dabrowski, came for his first formal visit in April. I was awake at 5 in the morning cleaning the kitchen that was already clean, going over everything in my head. Petra found me reorganizing the pots and pans at 6. "Stop," she said. I know what you're doing. Stop." She put the kettle on. "He's not coming to find fault. He's coming to see Hazel, and Hazel is fine. You know that." "What if she tells him she wants to leave?" Petra poured the water without answering right away. Then she said, "If she does, we listen. But she's not going to." "You don't know that." "I know her." She slid a mug across the counter. "Callum, you've been home at 6 every night for 2 months. You apologized when you were wrong, and you didn't make her feel responsible for it. You built her a shelf, and you're teaching her to use a measuring tape, and you sat on the hallway floor with her for 45 minutes while she held a ceramic owl. You're doing the work. That's all any of this is." I held the mug. "It doesn't feel like enough." "It never feels like enough. That's what it feels like to be a parent." Kevin Dabrowski was thorough and unhurried. He walked through the house, looked at Hazel's room, the drawings on the wall, the shelf, Gerald the owl, the line of small wooden figures. He spoke with Hazel alone for 20 minutes, while Petra and I waited in the kitchen. When he came out, Hazel followed, holding Gerald. Kevin looked at his notes. "Hazel says she misses her mom," he said. "She says she's still figuring things out." I nodded. "She also says nobody has thrown any of her mom's things away," he said. "She says her shelf was built for her specifically because she's short, and she says Petra gives her the real answer, not the easy one." He clicked his pen. "I'll be recommending continuation of placement. I'll return in 90 days. He left. Hazel stood in the hallway looking at us. "I told him the true things," she said. "That's all you should ever tell," Petra said. Hazel looked at her. "I told him you two are weird together," she said. "Weird how?" I said. She shrugged with 6-year-old precision. "Like you want to say stuff to each other, but you don't." She disappeared up the stairs with the owl. Petra and I stood in the hallway. Neither of us said anything for a moment. "She's not wrong," Petra said finally. "No," I said. That evening was the first time we talked about it directly. Hazel was asleep. We were at the kitchen table again, which was where everything important happened in that house. I said, "When this gets to the point where Hazel is settled, when the court is satisfied, what do you want?" Petra looked at the table. "You mean, do I want to leave?" "I mean, I'm not going to hold you here with obligation. You came because you're the kind of person who doesn't walk away from something that needs doing, but that's not the same as choosing this." Petra was quiet for a long time. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a car went past. "I came because I couldn't not," she said. "But I've stayed because I wanted to. Those are different things." I looked at her. "How long have they been different?" She met my eyes. "Longer than I've admitted." I didn't push it further that night, but something in the house shifted after that. Some small held thing released. We didn't suddenly become different people. But Petra started sitting closer at the table. I started saying her name more than I had to. Small things. The kind of small things that are, in hindsight, the whole story. In June, Kevin Dabrowski came for the second visit. By then, Hazel had acquired a fish named Gerald too, because Gerald the owl had felt lonely, and she'd started spending Saturday mornings in the workshop with me, measuring and sanding and occasionally testing the tensile strength of things by throwing them, which we were working on. She still had days when she went quiet. She still slept with the light on. But she'd started calling me by my name instead of nothing, and once, when I'd picked her up from a neighbor's birthday party, she'd walked to the truck and got in the back without being asked, buckled herself in and said, "That was pretty good," in the tone of someone giving a professional assessment. Kevin's report recommended permanent guardianship. The hearing was brief. Afterward, in the parking lot, Hazel stood between us in the May sunlight with her hands in the pockets of her jacket. She said, "So I actually live there now?" "You actually live there now," I said. She considered this. "Gerald too needs a bigger tank," she said. "That seems fair," Petra said. We drove home. Hazel fell asleep in the back seat somewhere past Napanee, her cheek against the window. Petra reached over and turned the radio down without being asked. I looked at the highway ahead, the familiar stretch of 401, the flat green of the fields coming into view past the concrete. I thought about Sophie, not with the old guilt that had lived in me for 7 years like something calcified, but with something closer to grief and gratitude mixed together. She had raised Hazel alone for 6 years, and she had done it well, and she had written my name in a letter and asked the world to find me. I didn't deserve that. I was going to spend the rest of my life being worthy of it anyway. That night, after Hazel was in bed, Petra and I sat on the back step. The fire pit was cold. The swing set I'd finally fixed stood in the dark at the edge of the yard. The Ontario spring was doing its best, not quite warm yet, but no longer mean about it. I said, I don't want to wait until some designated endpoint to say what I want to say. Petra looked at me sideways. Then don't. I want you to stay, I said. Not because of Hazel. Or not only because of Hazel, because this is the most real my life has ever felt, and that's you. That's who you are in this house. I don't know what to call it exactly, but I know what it would feel like if it were gone. Petra looked at the dark yard. She didn't answer right away. That was her way. She never filled silence just to fill it. Then she said, when I left Cass, I thought I was done letting things matter to me. It was too expensive. I was always miscalculating the cost. She paused, and then you showed up at my door looking like you'd been hit by something, and 3 days later I was in a courtroom in Ottawa, and I thought, well, apparently I'm still in the business of letting things matter. I turned to look at her. She looked back. I'm staying, she said. I'm not staying because of obligation. I'm staying because I would miss this. I would miss her. I would miss you. A pause. I would miss this kitchen table, honestly. We've had about 40 important conversations at that table. I laughed. A real one, the kind that comes out before you've decided to. She smiled, which she didn't do extravagantly, so when she did, you noticed it. I reached over and took her hand. She didn't pull away. From inside the house, small footsteps crossed the floor above us. A pause. Then Hazel's voice came down through the window screen. I can hear you, you know. Go to sleep, Hazel, Petra said. Are you holding hands? Good night, Hazel. A considering silence, then, okay, good night. The footsteps retreated. Petra looked at me. I looked at her. The yard was dark, and the swing set needed paint, and somewhere inside, a fish in a slightly too small tank was waiting for an upgrade, and my daughter was listening through the floorboards like a very small surveillance operation. I didn't need it to be more than that. When Kevin Dabrowski's final report came in the fall, it described Hazel as thriving, engaged in school, connected to home, demonstrating secure attachment to both adults in the household. The language was careful and official, the kind of language that can't quite hold what it's trying to describe. What it was actually describing was this. Hazel had started calling Petra by a name she'd invented herself, P, short and certain, the way she called everything that mattered to her. She called me Dad on the first day of school because her teacher had asked who was picking her up, and she'd answered without pausing, and I'd found out from Petra that evening, who told me with a completely neutral expression that was not fooling anyone. I went back into the workshop that night and made Hazel a small wooden fish to go next to Gerald the owl. She installed it herself on the shelf, assessed the arrangement, and moved the star 2 centimeters to the left. Now it's balanced, she said. I looked at the shelf, at the owl and the fish and the star and the small wooden bird I'd made in the first uncertain week, not knowing whether she'd want it. At the photograph of Sophie that Hazel had printed and framed herself, standing at the end of the row. Yeah, I said, it is. I used to think the worst thing I ever did was let Sophie drive away without answering her. Now I know the worst thing was the silence after. Every email I read and closed, every response I typed and deleted, every morning I told myself I'd figure out what to say tomorrow. That kind of cowardice doesn't announce itself. It just accumulates, quietly, until one day a social worker calls from Ottawa and the bill comes due all at once. What I've come to understand is that our choices don't disappear when we stop thinking about them. They just wait. The 7 years I spent not answering became 6 weeks. Hazel spent in a care family's house, not understanding why her world had fallen apart. Those two things are connected. They were always connected. I just couldn't see it from where I was standing. Petra understood this before I did. She'd lived her own version of it. The case she'd signed off on because she was tired. the boy named Marcus who paid the price for her hesitation. She hadn't become bitter from that. She'd become precise. She knew exactly what it cost to look away, and she'd decided she wasn't willing to pay it again. That kind of clarity, knowing what you stand for and then actually standing there when it's inconvenient, that's not something you're born with. Something you build, slowly, out of every hard moment you chose not to walk away from. Hazel taught me something I didn't expect. I thought I was going to have to earn her trust by being impressive, by having the right answers, by not making mistakes. What she actually needed was simpler and harder than that. She needed to see me do what I said I would do, over and over, without being asked. She needed to see me admit when I was wrong without turning it into a performance of guilt. She needed to see that the patterns held. Kids are extraordinarily good at knowing when adults are being consistent, and when they're just performing consistency. Hazel knew the difference before she had words for it. What changed in that house, what I'm still not entirely sure how to describe, is that three people who had all learned to live carefully, to keep a certain amount of themselves in reserve, slowly ran out of reasons to do that. Not because anything grand happened. Because the small things kept adding up. A shelf built at the right height, a fish named Gerald too. Dinner on the table at 6. An apology that didn't ask for anything in return. I think about the version of me who deleted those emails 7 years ago, who chose the easier day over the harder conversation. I don't have a lot of patience for him, but I've stopped trying to prosecute him too. What matters now is what I do with the chance I didn't earn. That's the only real question any of us ever faces, not whether we've been good enough in the past, but whether we're willing to be honest enough, steady enough, and brave enough today. Hazel put Gerald the owl, and Gerald too the fish, and a photograph of Sophie all on the same shelf. She stood back and looked at it and said it was balanced now. I think she was right about more than the shelf.